Hello, I'm Burt Wilson. Welcome back to Ancient Wisdom for the 21st Century. We're glad you're here. Well, last week we talked about how the universe unfolded. This week we're going to discuss how intelligence, divine intelligence, came into the universe as it unfolded and how all that happened. And this is going to be a long thing, so we're going to get into it right off the bat just after this. Okay, we're back. Now, do you remember the 7 planes of existence? Well, in addition to being differentiations and gradations of psychic energy, they are also principles of existence. That is, all things which come into existence will have their source and being in these 7 principles. So as the 7 planes permeate the entirety of the intergalactic space, they also contain something that is very important to the universe: divine intelligence. Now, does this divine intelligence come from a supreme being or personal God? Absolutely not. It emerges from within infinity concurrently with the unfoldment of the 7 planes of psychic energy. The kind of intelligence we are talking about here is more like a divine thought or cosmic ideation that contains the entire basic plan of the universe. Now, in the Christian world, this would be known as God's divine plan. But this one is unlike anything the Christian ministers would have us believe. This divine intelligence will be the guiding force behind the construction and evolvement of the planets, stars, human beings, and so forth within each universe. Thus, when a Leia center is exploded into a universe, this divine thought is, as Madame Blavatsky writes, impressed on cosmic substance. That's the particles which are shot out into space. It's impressed upon them as the laws of nature. Now, this is the same nature's law referred to by the deist founding fathers who wrote the United States Constitution. This divine intelligence is administered, so to speak, by 7 celestial beings who are actually formless and unembodied. Therefore, beings only in the sense of an unembodied existence. Now, where do they come from? According to the ancient scriptures, the stanzas of Dazan, they are self-born from the inherent power in the matrix of mother substance. In other words, each Leia center contains a group of these 7 celestial beings, and they awaken to life along with the rest of the universe. Now, while the Leia center has been sleeping in a state of pralaya, these 7 celestial beings have been the silent watchers, the caretakers of the benign atom, waiting for the keynote of creation to explode it into a universe and reactivate their powers. Thus they comprise and reside in the Son of the universe, or as it's called in the ancient wisdom, they are collectively the Son of God. Now, what sun are these 7 beings supposed to be in? Certainly not the sun we see shining every day at the center of our galaxy. The energy released in the explosion of a Leia center is shot out into space as a 7-layered wave to form the outer limits of a vast globular universe. The circumference of this spatial globe of energy is the actual sun we're talking about. The ancient wisdom refers to this as the central sun or hidden sun, because it is the invisible source from which will later evolve the visible suns around which galaxies are formed, of which ours is one. It is often called the sun behind the sun. Now, author Mary Renault, in her follow-up book about Alexander the Great called The Persian Boy, mentions this hidden sun in the first chapter. The great Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten, who devised the world's first monotheistic religion, used this sun as a centerpiece in the Egyptian worship, which they worshiped this sun as the disk. It is this concept of a hidden central sun that is the core cosmogony of the ancient esoteric sun-worshipping cults. This is particularly true of the Persian cult of Mithras. Thus, the common people were given the visible sun to worship because they needed a visual image of God. But those who were in the inner, initiated circles of such cults knew that the physical sun was just a symbol, a visible representation of the transcendental reality, in this case, that being the invisible hidden sun. Now, the Roman Emperor Constantine I, a lifelong pagan sun worshipper of the cult of Mithras, lifted this concept part and parcel from the cult's cosmogony and manipulated the Holy Fathers of the early Catholic Church. He manipulated by dangling before them the status of becoming the preferred religion of the whole empire. He did that to apply it to Christianity. Thus, the person of Jesus was morphed into the visible symbol of the invisible transcendental deity and was thus fabricated to become the living Son, or S-U-N, of God. This hidden sun comes into being after the explosion of a layer center creates the outer limits of the globe, that is, the sphere of influence of a universe. The seven celestial beings who emerge with it as unembodied forces of light inhabits its outer reaches. It is they who will collectively administer the divine plan. These seven celestial beings use what the ancient wisdom calls the power of will and yoga, that is, focused thought or meditation, to construct all that will be. It is the collective will, just as the Christians' God's will, of these seven celestial beings which will eventually accomplish all aspects of the creative process, for the divine will in motion amounts to a spiritual creative force, and this higher energy force will carry with it the spiritual plan which will create manifested things after being excited into being. Now, in his book, The Universe in a Single Atom, the Dalai Lama also speaks of these seven beings as celestial beings, adding that they are free from material embodiment, and they also possess bodies composed of light. It is not only in Eastern teachings that this creative concept is taught, because these beings play a central role in the fundamental cosmogonies of all four major religions. Now, in Tibetan Buddhism, these seven gods are called Dayan Shohans, which means lords of meditation in Sanskrit. Now, this is precisely correct because a very high being can focus his energy so completely that he can shape matter and even move it around. Thought is energy, and the higher concentrated thought of the Dayan Shohans can literally move mountains. Now, in Judaic scriptures, these celestial beings are the mystical seven Elohim of the Kabbalah. The word Elohim stands for a plural or indeterminate number of beings, and it is the word Elohim in the first sentence of the ancient Hebrew account of creation in Genesis, which is translated in all versions of the Bible as God. That is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Thus, this first verse of the Bible should properly read, in the beginning, God's created the heaven and the earth. And they did. As for Islam, the ancient tradition of the Muslims has the Kaaba, that cubic-shaped granite rock in the Grand Mosque at Mecca, marking the spot where it is said the Prophet Muhammad left the earth. They say it is surrounded by 7 ethereal Kaabas, which are said to be hovering over it in 7 heavens. Now, this corresponds exactly to the unfoldment of the universe into 7 differentiated levels of psychic energy. In Christianity, these 7 beings, of course, are called archangels or messengers of God. In the tradition of the church, they are as attendants at God's throne and said to help out with God's tasks and lend assistance to suffering people on earth. They're also said to conduct the war in heaven against evil. Now, this is all made up malarkey, but the word messengers is the key here, as they are the ones who carry the light to the universe and administer the evolution of the divine plan, although you won't find that written anywhere in the Catholic Encyclopedia. Thus do the cosmogonies of all 4 great world religions celebrate the existence of the 7 celestial beings as the first creative emanations from the Godhead. Now, while most Christians will probably find the subject of celestial beings confusing or a complete fabrication, Madame Blavatsky writes in her collected writings, volume 14, that get this now, the Roman Catholics give a reading far more approaching the true esoteric meaning of creation than that of the Protestants. For several of their saints and doctors admit that the formation of heaven and earth, of the celestial bodies and so forth, belongs to the work of the 7 angels of the presence, that is, the 7 celestial beings. St. Denis calls them builders. Have we heard that before? And that's what the 7 beings are. The cooperators of God, he calls them. St. Augustine goes even farther and credits the angels with the possession of divine thought, that is, universal intelligence, the prototype, as he says, of everything created. And finally, St. Thomas Aquinas has a long dissertation upon this topic, calling God the primary and the angels, the 7 celestial beings, the secondary cause of all visible effects. Thus, the viability of the 7 celestial beings and their work in the creation process is again borne out by ancient writings. But you won't hear this preached in any Catholic church, because these are the beings, 4 of them anyway, that the Catholic Church says have fallen. When the 7 celestial beings disperse into the 7 planes, each takes up residence in a different level. The 3 celestial beings in the planes of Atma, Buddhi, and Manas are said to refuse to create. That's because nothing of any material mass can exist in those planes. Yet the universe must create to fulfill its purpose. So 4 of the celestial beings are said to fall into incarnation on the lower planes in order to carry out the divine plan. Then, with the 3 celestial beings in the higher planes providing guidance, the 4 celestial beings in the lower planes do the actual work. Thus we have a trinity and a quaternary. The top 3 ethereal planes make up the trinity, and the 4 lower planes, more substantive than the top 3, make up the quaternary. The fact that 4 of the celestial beings fall into incarnation leads us to the devilish Roman Catholic myth of the fallen angels. Everyone has heard of the evil fallen angels. They are held up to us, particularly in Catholic theology, as rebels against God. Thus, these so-called evil fallen angels were consistently promulgated by the early church to be demons and unrecoverable for the rest of eternity as a result of their fall. There is not an ounce of truth to any of this. Rather, the fall was something altogether different. It was completely necessary in order to bring a connection from universal intelligence to the lower planes. Far from a fall from grace, this was considered to be a huge sacrifice, as it was done to benefit humanity. So we have to ask, why did the early church consciously contrive and promulgate the notion that the fallen angels were evil? Well, they did it to lend authority to a suspicion by the lower uneducated classes that there was an evil force in the world equal to God. This evil force was said by the church to be the root cause of all evil doing. As it turned out, this creation of an evil hierarchy of fallen angels and demons also helped the church sidestep a growing criticism among early philosophers and the intellectual elite of the times. They asked, how can your God, if he is a good God, allow evil in the world? What good God would do that? It was a legitimate question that demanded an answer. So the church's answer was to simply allow the concept of the evil fallen angels to persist, giving rise to the idea of an especially super evil being, Satan, actually existing on the same level as God. The church then transformed this evil image into the devil, with the so-called fallen angels as his minions. Thus, through a little manipulation here and there, God was no longer, according to the church, responsible for evil. In the esoteric doctrine of the ancient wisdom, the concept of Satan symbolizes the adversary of light or darkness. The two opposites themselves are one, representing two extremes of the Akashic principle. Most astrologers understand this. On a human level, they take the form of our own spiritual self, which is light, and our material self, which is darkness. Thus, we all have both concepts within us, and we do battle with Satan within us when we struggle to transcend the influence of our lower material self in order to act more with our higher self, our spiritual light. This is one of the most important concepts in the ancient wisdom, because it gives each one of us ultimate control over our own spiritual destiny. By twisting this concept and not telling the truth about it, the church and its priesthood simply let the idea of Satan, the adversary of God, take hold in the minds of earthly Catholic worshippers. This was very easy to do because the human intellect at that time was not prepared psychologically to understand the abstract principles of good and evil, that there is, in fact, no principle of evil per se in the world, that what is perceived as evil is simply the absence of good, just as darkness is the absence of light. This means that while there can still be evil people and evil forces in the world, there is no polar opposite of the principle of good, or God, called evil. Thus neither can there be a polar opposite and equal of God, called the devil. So the idea of there being a devil took on a life of its own, and it wasn't until the 1217 at the Fourth Lateran Council in Rome that the Catholic bishops finally came around to plugging their theological hole by decreeing that God originally made the devil good, but was not responsible for him turning to evil. That is, becoming the devil was the devil's own choice. This self-serving device was supposed to get the church off the hook, but the fact remains that the intricacies of church doctrine were never taught to the practicing worshipers. They wouldn't understand them. Thus, the concept of the devil as Satan, the adversary of God, was conveniently allowed to grow ever stronger and remains today the fallacy it has always been. Madame Blavatsky states that this was allowed to happen because without a devil there would be no need for the church. Thus, with each passing year, it became simply a matter of convenience for the church to duck the facts of the true foundations of existence and allow this fiction to strengthen its hold on the masses. On its self-created devil, the church not only blamed the evil in the world, but used it to bring religious fear into the hearts of its worshipers. First, they scared them with stories about the existence of evil and the devil, and then proclaimed the Catholic Church as the only defender, as the one true church, from those evil forces. Interesting, since it was the church itself that created them. Now, unfortunately, and most likely unforeseen, the creation of Satan, the devil, as the adversary of God, prevented the early church and the priesthood from ever doing any real spiritual good in the world. That is, informing humanity of the true spiritual nature of their being. Instead, the priesthood put their fabricated doctrine to work deliberately as a powerful social force in a worldwide quest for political and temporal power. Nothing has been the same in the world ever since. Madame Blavatsky brilliantly defined the fallacy of Catholic doctrine by pointing out that if there is an all-powerful God and an equally powerful adversary, the devil, they would cancel each other out, and there would be either no God, or else God would be the devil. Thus, to the church which affirms that the devil exists, she writes, the world replies with terrifying logic, then God does not exist. And it is vain to seek escape from this argument to invent the supremacy of a God who would permit a devil to bring about the damnation of men. Such a permission would be a monstrosity and amount to complicity, and the God that could be an accomplice of the devil cannot be God. Thus, the concept of the so-called fallen angels is simply fabricated Catholic doctrine. It is a fact that for any of the 7 celestial beings to have to adjust their high vibratory rate in order to exist in the lower planes constitutes a huge sacrifice for humanity. They are truly the guardian angels of us, and they are at the top of the hierarchy of light who oversee the evolution of our planet. They are in possession of cosmic intelligence and the divine plan, and although unable to interfere in the karma of humanity, are tireless in helping us find ways to climb out of the holes we have dug for ourselves in the materialism of life. We never see these great beings, but we can perceive their presence everywhere. The original sacrifice of these 7 great celestial beings is wholly consistent with the spiritual principle of selflessness and stands as a vital spiritual lesson for us all. For now, we must understand that cosmic intelligence is not in the hands of demon angels, but in the hands of a vast system of self-sacrificing hierarchies who carry out the divine plan. Well, I think that's all the time I have for this week, so I thank you very much for watching. I'm Burt Wilson. This is Ancient Wisdom for the 21st Century. We'll see you next week.